Hi, welcome back to my channel. I was hoping that I wanted to share, hold on, let's see if I can get this adjusted properly. There we go, much better. So I wanted to come online so that I could share a little bit about how I manage my triggers, because a lot of people, that's really where they find a lot of the struggle, right? Because you can read a lot of books and listen to advice and all that, but when it comes right down to it, whenever you are triggered, how do you actually manage your trigger? Now, I'm not coming from a place where I have fully figured it out, but I'm taking my wins every single day. So these days I find that I get triggered and I do a much better job at not only controlling my thoughts during that moment, but being able to feel whatever feelings come up. And for the most part, if I need to take space, and I do that, but if I can also address the situation even amidst the trigger, I'll do that. So I wanted to just kind of walk you through my blueprint on how I handle my triggers. So you guys know, when I talk about triggers, I know every single person goes through a period of time where you are triggered, fired up, negative emotions, especially whether it is anger, shame, sadness, irritation, you name it, whatever those triggers are. You guys know what I'm talking about. You know the feeling. Some of us, I think, if I had to describe us, some of us are half full when it comes to triggers. So, we can deal with situations, multiple situations, before we feel like we need to blow a gasket. But many of us actually live our lives like really right on the brim, that any little thing here and there can literally pop our lid off. And I think the most important thing is, besides self-love, because by self-loving, you're emptying that cup of frustrations and impatience and pain and anger and grief. Now, when those emotions kick in, I'll talk about myself. The very first thing that I tend to feel is this very hot sensation that might be in my chest. I might feel like a knot in my stomach or a knot in my chest. I might sometimes feel some pain around my neck. But once I feel those things, I know I'm triggered. I may not fully understand why, but I know that I'm triggered. Now, when you do your homework prior to getting triggered, where you've done your going back in time to figure out most of the traumas that you've been through and some of those negative stories that you tell yourself, you already have them right in the forefront. So for me, whenever I get triggered, within a second or two, I know what it is that's being triggered. I know the wound that's been triggered, and then I have my blueprint, right? And the very first thing that I try to do is I try to pause. But a lot of times, though, I might come off a little bit defensive initially, and then within a minute, I'm gonna go, I'm sorry. Why? Because that very instinctual, right, reaction, sometimes we can't fully control it. Not in the beginning, because we need to be able to learn to discipline ourselves, to give ourselves that pause, right? But if you're not able to do that in the beginning, what you'll notice is that you might end up being defensive or lashing out in some way passively, hopefully not more aggressively towards the person, because we don't want physical violence, right? So for me, I may come off a little bit defensive, and then I might go, hey, I apologize. I think I was coming off a bit defensive. I think that when you were talking to me about this issue, I started feeling a little bit triggered. I know the wound that is being triggered, and I know it has nothing to do with this. Now, in that moment, I can say something like, can I take some time just to process these feelings so that I can come back and really be able to be here and pay attention? Or I'm able to address these in my mind. Now, depending on who you're having this dialogue with, the hope would be that if the person's a little bit more secure, or if the person doesn't have a trigger around your defensiveness, then you're able to apologize and they're able to go, okay, I understand that, and then you can now move into dialogue, right? But if you're with someone who actually gets triggered, meaning that when you get triggered and let's say you get defensive, they then get triggered because your defensiveness to them comes off as though maybe you're attacking them, I think that's where it becomes a lot more difficult. And if this is someone that you're close to and you're able to really open up, and if they're able to open up as well, if they're being triggered by your trigger and they're able to open up and say, okay, I understand that you're apologizing, I need to apologize as well because I'm getting triggered by this. Do we need to take some time, or can we try to dialogue through this? So there really has to be a lot of curiosity and a lot of questions. If we don't do that, then what we do is we end up just ascribing intentions, negative intentions towards people's actions. So number one, don't take things too personally. It's easier said than done, but really and truly, I think after you've gone through the trigger and you've processed, really take some time to go back into the situation and figure out what was it, what did I hear when this person said this thing? How did I feel inside? What wound was triggered? Because when a wound is triggered, then you know the unhealed parts of yourself that need more work. Because if you can journey yourself back to maybe the very first time you felt that emotion, maybe as a kid or maybe a young adult or an adolescent, you can reframe how you thought about that situation. And once you can reframe that, then you can show up a little bit more different. Now, I'm going to give you an example, and this is with my partner, my husband. My husband is so sarcastic, and this is like his norm. And sarcasm for him is like it's a treat, it's cool. But for me, sarcasm usually would come off as though, goodness, am I silly? Am I stupid? Do I not understand things right? So in time, I started researching more about sarcasm. What is it? Why do people use it? And I think everything really comes back down to trust, right? So I love my husband. I trust him. I know he loves me, and I know that he respects me. And then instead of me, again, getting into the space of being triggered whenever he uses sarcasm, because that's his normal way of talking, I observed him using sarcasm with other people, and it wouldn't cause any type of issues, right? So now it's either he changes or I do. I wanted to do the change because I was the one that was getting triggered by something that other people find quite normal. And so what I started doing was I started, again, whenever he says that, if I should get triggered, like, ooh, I feel like I'm dumb, I don't understand, I'd say to myself, no, I'm not dumb. And then I'll say, ooh, there you go with your sarcasm again. Ooh, if I get to the point where I understand sarcasm and I can use it, I'll be sarcastic all day long. The moment I use humor, it breaks it down completely and I don't personalize anymore. And then one day we were having a chat, and I can't remember what the situation was, and then he was sarcastic, and I just giggled. And I was like, ooh, there you go again. But I just giggled, and I remembered, oh wow, I couldn't feel anything in my body. I caught the sarcasm, but I couldn't feel anything in my body. And I remember telling him, oh my goodness, I think by practicing this time and time again, I've in probably some way, when you think about neuroplasticity, probably being able to train my brain to see sarcasm from a very neutral perspective. Don't look at it as good, don't look at it as bad, it's just neutral. And then I can move myself into a space where I say, do I want to learn more about sarcasm? Do I want to learn to understand sarcasm so I can pick sarcasm when someone is really trying to be rude, and I can understand it from a place of just, being very witty, right? So that's the example. Big things. Number one, you got to ask yourself, what is it about this situation that's triggering me? What is it about this that really has to do with what's going on versus what's happened to me in the past, right? Are there things about maybe my caregivers, my parents, grandparents that raised me, right? Are there aspects of them that I'm seeing in my partner or in my friend or in my boss, and that's what's reminding me of them? And that's why it's triggering. I need to be able to identify that. But the biggest part of it is taking responsibility and realizing, are there parts of me that actually shows up this way? And for me, when I started doing that, and that's what I call shadow work, I was shocked at how I was also showing up in those same ways. And by identifying that, I'm able to give myself grace and go, oh my, and by being able to give myself grace, I can give them this. Now keep in mind, there are some triggers that may never go away. And there are triggers that you may never be able to control. And there are triggers that are not caused by you or your past, but they're caused by the person who's actually maltreating you. But, if you decide that you want to try to learn to control that, you might be able to. So I don't want us to move into the space where it's like we're moving towards like perfectionism, right? Where every single situation that happens, I'm not going to be triggered, or if I do get triggered, I'm going to be able to control myself. There are times where you might not be able to. So make sure that you're giving yourself enough grace when those times arise. Thanks for listening again.